a lot of the aspects of my life were abnormal. Okay. Abuse is abnormal. Living in, we essentially lived in a basement was abnormal to what I would have wanted in my life. And I started thinking, okay, well, what would my life look like if it were quote unquote normal? What does that even mean? And I started to think through what would have to change.
Welcome back to the Carla Rand Show. I'm super excited to have Chelse Moffatt with me today. And remember, the Carla Rand Show is about your physical, spiritual, mental, emotional health. And each episode, we may talk about different parts of your health. Today, I think we're going to be talking a lot about mental health and probably emotional type stuff. But I don't know exactly what Chelse has for us, but I do know that she has gone through a lot and she has a lot to share. So Chelse, why don't you start? Well, first of all, I just want to welcome you to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell us, where are you from, Chelse? Kind of where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family and stuff.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in the Rochester, New York area. I was the oldest child of two to a really young family. Parents were super young. So we kind of grew up all together, I'd say the four of us. And I still live in the same town, the same area of New York.
Nice. So what was your family like? You said were you pretty close knit? Was everything functioning really well?
Yeah, so my family was really unique. I was born into what I would call a traditional Italian family. So when I was born, my parents were 17, 18 years old. So they really had to rely on their family to help just because resources were really tight. So I grew up in a house with my parents, my younger sibling, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, great uncle, and right next door to my great grandparents. And we were a really tight knit family, blue collar, working class family that, spent a lot of time together. And the house was always loud. It was never quiet. And that's how we lived for the first 15 years of my life before my parents finally had the resources to support themselves and buy a house on their own.
Nice. Yeah, we had a really loud family growing up too. There were 6 kids in my family. Of course, we didn't have any extras. It was just the 6 kids. And then in my own family, I have 6 kids. So noise we're really accustomed to noise. And I get that. And it's funny how you can get accustomed. But at the same time, sometimes I'm just I just need no noise for a little while. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I totally do. Noise became comforting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's let's have a party, let's every day was a party kind of thing. So cool. So yep. Tell us your story now, Chelse. We're going to get right into it. Tell us, I know you've gone through some trauma, you've gone through some difficult times. So just go ahead and share kind of whatever you feel like you want to share. And then we'll sort of talk about how you took all of that trauma and difficult things that happened to you and how you've turned it around. But let's start with the bad stuff and then we'll get to the good stuff after. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And before I jump into that, the overarching theme in my life and the reason that I wanted to share is because I feel that a lot of the self-help and development books that I read right now are just reaffirming and concrete some of the natural patterns that I created just going through trauma, and I can identify with a lot of it. So that's what I'm hoping to share today. So my story really begins again when I was born into a family to young parents, and when your parents are also growing up at the same time, there's some limitations as far as how much they can support you in that parenting role. And I saw them grow and change, and so what life was like then was they really had to rely on the other people in the household a lot of times to watch over me, take care of me. And so a lot of times in a healthy functioning family, that's a great thing and a blessing. And sometimes if you have somebody in the family who's not functioning and isn't super healthy, you can really be at risk for predatory, not good behavior. So what ended up happening to me is I sustained some pretty serious trauma from a young child at the hands of somebody else that lived in the house. And that went on for quite some time. And what I can tell you, and what people who've gone through this in the past might also be able to tell you, is you start to tell yourself that there's something different about you. And this is something where you're verbalizing that in your own self-mind or just a feeling. it's a feeling of there's something different, there's something different, there's something different, and it's not a good different. All right. So growing up like that, and another funny thing, again, just to jump right into it, is that as a child going through trauma, I had this belief that people knew what was going on, and they didn't. They had no idea. And my intrinsic belief that they knew caused me to be very angry. So you have the initial trauma as a child, you're going through life thinking that there's something different, having anxiety, being a little secretive. And then you hit, kind of your adolescence. And that's when things start to take a different form and shape. You throw hormones on top of trauma and things take on a different form. So for me, that was anger and rebellion. So everyone goes through their own thing, I would say, as an adolescent. And mine, I was looking for every opportunity to make choices that would be flying in the face of any rules or values that my parents had tried to instill in me, because that was my rebellion. I wanted to, it was almost a self destruction race to the bottom,
Mm.
you
So,
know?
so you were young, okay? And you said you were abused then in the home by somebody in the home.
Yep.
Is this was a sexual abuse? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or no?
It was sexual abuse, and it went on for it started really young. I mean, young, and it went on until about the time I started school. And it was one of those things where, I mean, you go through it, you trust the people, and if you've lived through abuse like that, sometimes you just assume that either people know or that nobody can know. And it just, it shapes the way you're able to relate with the people around you. Yeah, I think that when people talk about the lasting effects of abuse, it's not the fact that the physical thing happened, it's the emotional, psychological ruts and patterns that you develop as keeping secrets as a child. It teaches you and reinforces you to keep secrets and feel like there's something weird and different about you. um, and it's almost isolating. You have a shell around you, you live in your own private world in your own head. And it was hard to connect with other people, other children, other adolescents, other adults, because it's a rut or a pattern that you form in your head by, you know feeling different, feeling, whatever that person, for me it was different, damaged, you know marred in some way.
Makes it interesting to me. And sorry this happened to you, by the way. I always just like, sometimes I feel like I just kind of jump ahead and I don't let it kind of like enough time to like impact, like this is not okay. Um,
Yeah.
but I feel like the effect that it would have on you knowing or assuming that other people knew about it, that probably changes. Whereas if it happened to somebody and they absolutely knew for a fact that nobody else knew, there might be something different. So I can see how you'd get angry because you'd be like, this is happening to me. Nobody's doing anything about it. Clearly they must think it's okay. Was that what was
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, I think, and again, in a child's mind, there are certain things that you assume to be true without ever really giving it a second thought until you're an adult and you can think back and say, of course, nobody knew. I just assumed that my parents knew everything,
Mm.
um, and that they weren't necessarily complicit, obviously, but permissive, or created an environment for that to happen. So, yeah, I mean, it made me very resentful of them, very, you
Mhm.
know?
So what did you do when you got to the teenage years, and this had stopped now, the abuse had stopped, and now you're just like trying to be rebellious. You're just like, I'm angry. I'm going to do everything that nobody wants me to do because yeah, you're angry. Who knows what's going on? You probably don't even know what's going on in your head exactly, but you just know you're upset and you want to just go and like you said, the fastest race to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, I let me tell you, that race to the bottom was fast and furious. So, starting at a really young age, before I was even a teenager, I looked for people that when I said that I had a hard time connecting with people, I found the friend groups that was low barriers to entry. Okay. So the people that were maybe misfits, or the naughty kids, or the people that would misbehave, because again, I felt the judgment was less if I'm articulating it as an adult. And the barrier to entry of those friend groups was low. I didn't have to perform well in sports. I didn't have to perform well in school. I didn't, in fact, having a bad attitude and the willingness to do bad things was encouraged, rewarded, and affirmed in these friend groups. So I was really eager to find groups like that. And I definitely did. So at a young age, I would say 12 years old, I started to experiment with drugs and, nothing too crazy, a little this, little that. But it was, I remember thinking and feeling, I know that this would actively, I knew it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew this would kind of fly in the face of what my parents would want. So I chose these behaviors, even though I had in my gut, I knew this isn't really fitting to who I want to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So just living that lifestyle. And then obviously in school was not a priority. I didn't feel like I had value. And when you don't feel you have value, you're not going to value the things around you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you see this all over the place. And I saw it in my life. I felt like, and I told you before, I felt kind of like a throwaway. And I hate to use that term, but that's what I felt. So I treated my life negligently. And so school, I didn't perform well. So the fact that I didn't perform well was proof that I was, not, I
Not
just
valued.
didn't have
important.
value.
Yeah.
So I created the situations that proved and affirmed my own thoughts and feelings about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through school and then you kind of bump along and you have static and things aren't great. It just wasn't, I felt like every day of my life was a fight with a parent, a fight with an administrator, a fight with a teacher, friends. It was constant static and it was exhausting. And I knew it wasn't comfortable, but I didn't really know how you would pull yourself out of that kind of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward 16 years old, and I found myself pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that was the beginning of a lot of change in my life.
Mm.
So basically what had happened was when you're 16 and pregnant, you become, what's the word? Repellent
Right.
to other teenagers. That was the quickest way to lose your boyfriend, to lose your best friends, to lose your acquaintances, and to feel really, again, isolated. And I found that was another pattern in my life that I felt different. I felt broken. I felt defective. I felt all of these negative feelings. And I just kept proving it to myself with the choices that I was making.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that now. I couldn't see that then.
Yeah.
So I remember when I went to sit down with my boyfriend at the time and tell him, and he just said, sucks to be you. And then I shared it with my friends, and they were like, "Wow, that's awful." And I didn't see them much in my family, so I was really by myself. So here's what happened during that time. Time kind of like slowed down. I didn't do it on purpose, but I know I can see the benefit and value in my life now. So let me explain. So life kept moving for everyone around me. My friend group, they did their thing. My family, they did their thing. My boyfriend, he lived his life. And I just was still. I just was still. Everything was stripped away from me. And I found myself thinking about, I could just watch everything objectively. And I can see the friend group that was doing the things that I didn't really want to do anymore. I couldn't do anymore. I couldn't partake in those activities. So I was forced to take a step back. And I started thinking about my future as a 16-year-old child. Future pacing and thinking about your future wasn't part of what I ever did. My future I didn't put a lot of value on that. I didn't put a lot of value on me. But now I had to think about myself and somebody else. And I had to make some serious choices on what that was going to look like. So I slowed down and I watched and I kind of listened and observed, and I got out of my own head forcibly. through circumstance. And here's what I determined is that I felt like a lot of the aspects of my life were abnormal. Okay. Abuse is abnormal. Living in, we essentially lived in a basement was abnormal to what I would have wanted in my life. Having a boyfriend desert you was abnormal. Having your friend group desert you was abnormal. And I started thinking, okay, well, what would my life look like if it were quote unquote normal? What does that even mean? And I started to think through what would have to change and what would I want. I don't want to look out my bedroom window living in a basement with my parents and see the ground. I want to live upstairs. If I could live in an upstairs bedroom, that would feel normal. And it started with little things like that. Okay, what would it take to get that? I probably need a job. Okay, what could I do for a job? What do I need to be in order to be employable? You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So I started to think through what I wanted and what is possible.
And this is really important, you guys. Like, listen to Chelsea here, because I feel like what you're saying, like, it may sound simple, but as you keep going, I think we'll realize why it's so powerful, that you're sort of stepping back and you're like, what would be normal and what do I actually want? So, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. And in doing that, I did decide, I realized I had a moment. Something my father had always told me was that hope is found in the darkest places in life. And in that moment, when I was still in kind of by myself and having to reassess, I found, not to be tacky or cliche, like I found that hope. And I became very aware of number one, a 16-year-old with a giant chip on her shoulder is probably not going to be mom of the year. So I started making a plan for adoption for my baby. So I knew, okay, I'm moving him. I'm thinking about his future. What are his parents going to look like? What are his opportunities going to look like? What would I want for him that I didn't have? What does a good normal life look like versus a chaotic abnormal life look like? So I started to plan for him, and I started to plan for me. And in doing that, what I did naturally is I started to daydream. I started to let my mind go and think about what's possible. And I started to, one of the people that stepped into my life was essentially like a caseworker or somebody to help teenagers in my situation. And I remember looking at her car. Now, when I was a child, I remember watching our family's only car get repossessed. And and it was heartbreaking. And then I looked at this woman, her name was Judy. I looked at her car and she drove a red Buick. And I remember thinking, like, it does not have any rust. It's clean, it's shiny. Her clothes were always nice. Her hair was always nice. She was pleasant. She smiled. She was calm. She had a calming presence. And she was an older woman. And I started to, in my head, daydream about what does her house look like? Because she seemed normal.
Mhm.
What does her, I bet she has kids and I bet her kids go to college. I bet she has a husband and that husband probably wears like docksiders. Um, she probably has a 2-story house. They probably have 2 living rooms with a finished basement. And I started to think about what does Judy's life look like? And could I plug into something like that? So I started thinking about my life and really like fantasizing around, I want to have a husband. I want to have my husband work a good job. I want to have a partner. I want somebody who can link arms with me when life gets really ugly because I've gone through ugly stuff and I am no stranger to the fact that life can be ugly. And I want someone next to me versus running away. I started to think about, I want kids. I want to be able to mow a lawn. I want to be able to do yard work on a Saturday because that felt normal.
Mhm.
And so during this time in my life, I just started to dream. And I think where it came to a head was um, I remember at this point, I'm 17 and I go into labor as you do. And it was not fun, as it usually, labor is usually not fun. But it ended up where I had to go into an emergency C-section. So I went in. My mom was with me. Other than that, I was all by myself. And I remember just being strapped down. They have you put your arms out to the side. You're in like a T-shaped position. You're completely exposed. Your arms are open. Your body, everything is, you're at the mercy, like the mercy of the doctors and the people around you, and you're terrified. And I remember just in my head the most clear picture of what my life will look like on the other side of this, because that was awful. Um, and just getting really clear on my house and my husband and my kids and my job. And in that was born hope that things could be and will be different. And what I learned there was that if you can get really clear in your head about the things that are not serving you, in fact, are holding you back, and take an assessment and take an inventory of what is it in your life that if it were flipped, reverse, upside down, removed completely or tweaked, what is it that's holding you in your own prison, and like what needs to happen to remove it or change it. And that was the moment where I learned how to visualize and get really, really, really crystal clear. And the other side of that experience, my life was completely different. Completely different.
Yeah, I've done that visualization thing too, and I think it's so powerful. But it's interesting to me that you basically came up with this on your own, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, that's the starting. So you didn't have all these self-help books. You weren't listening to Tony Robbins. You were just like figuring it out. Because I've learned a lot of this, but mostly through like different influencers and stuff, or books or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so true. Visualize it, and visualize it really specifically. The more specific, the better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other piece to that is do it often. And the more you do it and the more clear you are and the more dedicated you are, it becomes not even, there was no doubt in my mind. By the time it was crystallized in my mind's eye, there was no doubt that this was going to happen. It was no longer a daydream. It was not even a goal. It was just going to be. And it's hard for me to describe how I started living like that person in my mind. You start living like that person. This person speaks in a way that sounds educated. I might not be educated, and that might just be my path. And I'm going to need certain skills or whatever. But
a lot of people
yeah,
do that, like in the fitness industry too. They'll be like, well, I'm not really the athletic type. It's like, well, why don't you pretend that you're the athletic type? And if you were the athletic type, what would you do? Would you maybe work out? Oh, yeah, maybe you would eat well. Maybe you'd get your sleep, like just basic stuff. So it's almost like you pretend you're that person, and then all of a sudden you become that person.
I agree. And what happened for me is I became aware that I would look for proof. If I told myself I was a bad student and I would perform poorly, and that was proof that I was a bad student because I performed poorly, and that was proof. And it's this circular, it's like the snowball effect, and it builds momentum. And if instead, you can flip what you're telling yourself about yourself, then you can live into that. I've done it, and it's completely transformative. Completely.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful to be able to just like flip the script and be able to just start living that way. And so many people don't do that. So if there's somebody stuck right now, maybe they've gone through trauma, maybe they're seeing that they're basically proving to themselves over and over, Chelse, that they aren't good, they aren't successful, they're always failing, they always make the wrong decisions or whatever, and they're in that space. What would you say to them? What should they maybe start with? What are some steps they can take?
I think that number one, identifying and just knowing that you're not, how would I say this? You're not all bad at everything. You have to find what you are good at. Like you said, if you feel you're going to the gym and you tell yourself you're not an athlete, if you tell yourself that, I show up every day, then you show up every day. I might not be an athlete, but I show up every day, and just tell yourself, I'm the person who does hard things. I'm the person who does the hard things. And then you trust yourself to do the hard things. And that's how you become. that's how you become, whether you want to become an athlete, whether you want to become top of your class, whether you want to become a top producer. You keep doing the things that the top producers do, and that's how you become.
Yeah, and even to like really go out of yourself sometimes and be like, okay, like maybe for example, financial success. This could just be an example, right? And be like, I am not financially successful. I am broke. But what would a financially successful person do? Well, they would maybe hold themselves in a certain way. Maybe they would go and like buy this or buy that. Not that you have to go and spend all your money, but sometimes just to have, just do some little indulgent thing like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go for a manicure. Like I just got paid. I set this money aside. I'm going to go for a manicure just because that's going to help me get into that mindset that like, this is what people that are successfully financially might do, right? Or whatever the thing is. That's just an example. But I think like, have you ever done stuff like that where it's like, I'm gonna do something that's gonna push myself way out of my comfort zone to try to become that person. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I went from an undereducated, wrong side of the tracks girl to a top producer in my field where people hire me to give them good advice in real estate as a listing agent. And the way I present myself in my life, I think you would be hard pressed to guess that this is where I cut my teeth and this is the way I was raised and this is what I had gone through. Because I have what my experience was is number one, I made friends with people who had what I wanted. I didn't hang out with people who were complainers and whiners and quitters. I wanted to be around people who were wealthier than I was, who had more successful businesses than I do, because it levels you up. It just does. It's a fact. Um, so doing it that way, and when you aren't clear of where the path is, hire a coach. That's another thing that I've always done is when you reach a point where you know you have more blind spots because you're in an area of life that you're so unfamiliar, or you're trying to get somewhere where you really, it's that you're looking through a glass dimly, or whatever the saying is. Sometimes you have to hire an expert who can give you the 500-foot view and tell you or help guide you through even finding where the path is to get to where you need to be. So make friends that have what you have, get a coach or a mentor, and take that inventory of your life and find, where am I uncomfortable? What is holding me back? Write it out, and then write down the opposite. You know, if you wake up late and you overspend and you don't track your budget and you don't even know what budgeting is, write it all down and write the opposite. If I had a budget, if I had a coach, if I had a system, if I had a schedule, what would my life be like? And if I did that for 5 months, 6 months, a year, what would be possible?
Yeah.
And dream about it, think about it.
Mm. So good. And like I've had a lot of coaches and I've come a long ways with those coaches, but I don't actually have like an official coach right now. And I'm like, you're like, like I need to get a coach again because it helps so much because you can only see so much. And I mean, you'll probably get there eventually, but you might get there when you're like 70 or 80, like after all this trial and error and slugging through. You hire a coach. They basically like show you the path. They take the blinders off the stuff that you can't see because you're not there yet. They're ahead of you and they basically just light the way for you. And you're like, oh, if I do A, B, and C, that's gonna okay. Like I didn't see that, or
Yeah.
I didn't see that perspective, right? So it's super powerful. So I'm glad you said that. So like, and yeah, all of those things are super important. Particularly, I mean, some of us have examples of like, maybe we know somebody that's been successful in the way that we want it to be successful. Maybe we want to be super fit. Maybe we know somebody. Maybe our mom was super fit, or we had a coach that was super fit, or whatever. But if you don't have that, like a lot of people, even with parenting, right? They're like, I like my parents were horrible parents, or like they were on drugs, or whatever. Like you got to find a mentor, right? You got to find, and
Mhm.
you may not be able to like hire a parenting coach per se, but you should be able to find somebody that you can say, oh, this is what they do. Okay, I'm going to try that too, right? And start like modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I did that naturally, and I would ask a lot of questions. I'm interested in people. I'm interested in how do they do it. So, for example, when I go to CrossFit and we're doing the runs, I always want to hang with the fast people. I want them to outrun me, and I want to be the slowest in the fast group, because the girls that are in the slow group, they quit halfway. I don't want to hang with them. They're great people. I don't want to run with them. Parenting, I found you're going to find people in parenting groups, or I had an aunt that was a great mom, or people in your church group. Widen your circle. If you find yourself in a place where you don't have if you can't afford a coach and you don't have the people in your life, this might be your wake up call to level up, do something different, shake it up. The more experiences you expose yourself to that are positive and fill your cup, the greater your odds are of crossing paths with somebody that does inspire you, does lift you up, does give you those ideas of how to make tweaks. And once I had those trusted people in my life, I would ask them. It's a weird question, and you have to really trust the person that you're asking. But I would ask them for feedback. Where you think, you know me well enough, where are my blind spots? Tell me, give me anything that you want to tell me. And I might agree with you, but I might not. But make me aware of something that I'm not aware of. I mean, there's the things you know.
Mhm.
There's the things you don't know. I don't know anything about quantum physics or anything. And there's the things you don't know. And that's where all of the good stuff is. So asking people questions about their life, bringing them into your life, and finding, your blind spots is important.
And you really have to put yourself out there, because I've done that. I mean, that's what this podcast is about, Chelsea. Like, it's like I've learned so much just by talking to people like you, right? It's like, yeah, you keep leveling me up, right? And you keep challenging me. And I do that all the time too. And you're right. It can get a little bit weird if people are like, hey, what? If I'll ask my staff or my kids or whatever, and other people that I know and that know me. And I'll just say, hey, like, what could I do better here? You saw me speak at this event. Like, what could I have done better? Or you saw me run this, or you see me the way I run, like, manage my staff. Like, what am I missing here? Because we all want to get better. Well, maybe we don't all want to get better. It's funny. I actually did something on my stories recently about that, about how some people really don't care, or they seem to not care. But I think ultimately everybody does want to get better. It's just they don't always maybe know how, or they're just not sure they want to put in the effort or really put themselves out there. And I would say, and I'm sure you would probably echo this, is just that why wouldn't you try to be as good at whatever you can be as possible? Be the best that you can be. Why wouldn't you do that? So putting yourself out a little bit might mean that you don't have regrets later on, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And what I found, just to check, a thing that you could do to check, is this really what I want? Again, goes to like the daydream. I found a daydream that I loved thinking about. I loved thinking about my house and my future, my kids. At night before I go to sleep, and this is going to sound narcissistic, bear with me. I know I have to get to CrossFit at 6 a.m. every morning, 5 days a week. Before I fall asleep, I envision cute outfits that I want to wear.
Mm.
And that makes me excited. So when my alarm goes off, I'm ready. So it could be just putting yourself in a mental place and finding the daydream that you connect with, that you love thinking about. If you don't really care about becoming, the head of your PTA at school, and it's not a daydream that you really love or whatever, maybe it's not fulfilling, and maybe that's not your path. Maybe it's not your thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true. Like, find that thing that lights you up and go for it. So we're going to wrap this up right away, Chelsea, but I'm going to give you I'm going to really put you on the spot here, but I'm going to give you kind of one more chance. Like, what would you say is your message to the world? Like, you've shared a lot here, but is there anything that you're missing, or is there any kind of, like, if you could just remember one thing from Chelsea, what would that kind of one thing be? Or maybe it's a couple of things.
I would say to do a fearless assessment of what's holding you back in your life, really look at it, and flip the script on that, and figure out what would life look like if this were different, changed, better, improved, or gone, and if you've gone through something difficult or hard, I think that I didn't mention this, the power of therapy, so that you don't feel so alone and isolated, and you're not dumping your stuff on people who really aren't qualified to help you. That's a side note.
Mm-hmm.
Get a good therapist. And being able to recreate your future in your mind's eye, and figuring out what would need to happen in order for me to get to where I want to be, and get very, very clear on what that is. And keep daydreaming. Let your mind wander.
Mm.
It's not a perfect science, but it really can pull you through some really dark times and some really good times. So start to dream, daydream.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Chelsea. I just loved everything you shared. And I love that you added the therapist thing. I was just talking to somebody this morning who is struggling with a bunch of stuff. And she's like, well, this thing didn't help me. I said, if that's not a good therapist, find a different therapist. Like, just keep going, like, find the groups, find the therapists, find the mentors that are going to help you, and don't quit until you find somebody that's going to help you.
Yeah, and define what help looks like. What does help even mean? Help you. What does help look like? Because that's a really broad statement. It didn't help. Well, what is it? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to keep going, Chelsea, because I just feel like this is so good. But if somebody who just wants to connect with you, maybe they want some tips about real estate, or they just kind of want to get to know you more, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a lady raising kids and selling real estate in Rochester, New York. But if you would love to connect, you can find me on Facebook at Chelse Moffatt. And I'd love to be friends. If you're a real estate agent building your business or you have referrals, it's something that we can always mastermind on. So, yeah.
Awesome. Good. Well, thanks, Chelse. Appreciate your time and your wisdom and just sharing your story with us. Thanks for being vulnerable. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. I absolutely love that you joined us. I love being able to record these, and I love our guests. It's been so much fun. So thank you. Please like it, share it, comment, do all of the things that you feel like you want to do if you enjoyed this podcast. I really, really appreciate that. And this podcast has been brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. So everything that we do locally with our workouts, with our group nutrition coaching, and with all of the other fun events and stuff that we run, we put all of that online. So now you can access everything, even if you're not locally, don't live in our area. So my coaches and I and all my staff, the whole team, we are putting so much work into these workouts. We're filming 5 fresh workouts every single week so that you never have to do the same workout twice. We're also doing group nutrition and personal nutrition coaching so that you get exactly what you need. And you know what the best part is? It's the community. The absolute best part is just knowing that you have the support, that you have the encouragement, that you have everything you need to succeed. So go to powerfitnessonline.com.